The auctioneer's voice was a rhythmic drone, bouncing off the rusted silos and the wilted cornfields of Black Ridge, Nebraska. It was an estate sale for a man named Silas Thorne, a recluse who had died with no heirs and a lot of secrets. Most of the crowd gathered around the shiny John Deere tractors and the pristine tool sets. No one looked twice at the back corner of the lot, where a 1974 Chevy C10 sat sinking into the mud. It was a skeleton of a vehicle. The paint had been surrendered to decades of harsh winters, leaving behind a map of orange rust and peeling primer. The tires were flat, the glass was filmed with green moss, and a thick smell of old gasoline and wet earth hung over it like a shroud. "Lot 402, the auctioneer yelled, barely hiding his boredom. "Old farm truck, non-runner. Scrap value only, do I hear 50? Jack Miller stood at the edge of the crowd, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his faded naval flight jacket. Beside him, Shadow, a massive German shepherd, with silver fur around his muzzle, sat perfectly still. Jack was 58, a retired Navy mechanic who had spent 20 years in the belly of aircraft carriers, coaxing life out of massive turbines and broken hydraulics. But civilian life hadn't been as easy to fix as a jet engine. After his wife passed and the local garage he worked at closed down, Jack found himself living in a one-bedroom apartment with a toolbox and a dog that was the only thing keeping him from drifting away entirely. He looked at the truck. It looked the way he felt. Discarded. Forgotten. Good bones buried under a lot of damage. 50, no bidders. The auctioneer sighed. Going once, going twice. 100, Jack said. His voice was gravelly, unused to speaking much lately. A few locals chuckled. One man, a local scrapyard owner named Silas Vulture Vance, leaned back and spat a stream of tobacco juice. "You're paying $100 for a pile of iron that'll cost you $300 to tow, Miller. You always were a bad gambler." Jack ignored him. He handed over his last two $50 bills. He didn't have a plan, but he had a truck. Or, at least he had the title to one. Comment 1 or 0 right now if you think Jack just made the biggest mistake of his life, and tell us where you're watching from tonight. We're glad you're with us. The sun was dipping low, casting long, bloody shadows across the Nebraska plains, when the tow truck finally dropped the Chevy in front of the small, rented shed Jack called his workshop. Shadow hadn't moved since they arrived. Most dogs would be sniffing the tires or chasing the grasshoppers in the tall weeds, but the German shepherd was fixated. He wasn't looking at the engine. He wasn't looking at the cab. He was standing by the rear wheel, his amber eyes locked onto the bed of the truck. A low, vibrating rumble started in his chest. It wasn't a growl of aggression. It was the sound Shadow made when he sensed something was out of place. "Easy, boy," Jack muttered, wiping grease from his forehead. "It's just an old farm rig. Probably got a nest of copperheads under the frame." But Shadow didn't back down. He jumped. Despite his age, the German shepherd cleared the tailgate in one fluid motion. He landed on the thick, black plastic bed liner that had been bolted into the truck sometime in the late 90s. The plastic was warped and cracked, covered in a layer of grime and old hay. Shadow didn't sniff around. He went to the center of the bed and sat down. He refused to move. Jack whistled. Shadow's ears twitched, but his gaze remained fixed on the plastic beneath his paws. Jack climbed up beside him, the metal of the truck groaning under the weight. He tried to coax the dog out with a piece of dried liver from his pocket, but Shadow ignored it. The dog began to scratch. His claws made a sharp, rhythmic screeching sound against the heavy plastic. "You smell a rat, Shadow? Or a raccoon?" Jack asked. But his heart started to beat a little faster. He knew that look. Shadow was a retired search and rescue dog he'd adopted from a fellow vet. When Shadow sat like that, he had found a target. Jack grabbed a crowbar from his kit. He began to unscrew the rusted bolts holding the liner in place. but they were seized tight. He had to pry. As the first corner of the plastic liner groaned and lifted, a smell wafted out. It wasn't rot. It wasn't animals. It was the smell of heavy-duty cosmoline, machine oil, and sealed canvas. The smell of a Navy supply deck. Jack froze. He looked at Shadow. The dog's tail thumped once against the liner. He worked for the next 3 hours by the light of a flickering shop lamp. Sweat soaked his shirt as he fought the stubborn plastic. When the final bolt snapped, Jack braced his boots against the tailgate and heaved. The liner slid back with a loud, wet pop, revealing the original metal bed of the Chevy. Jack's breath caught in his throat. The bed wasn't empty, and it wasn't rusted. Welded into the floor of the truck were 3 heavy-duty, waterproof military footlockers, painted in non-reflective olive drab. They had been bolted directly to the frame and then hidden beneath the plastic liner, which had been modified with a false wooden subfloor to keep the weight of the crates from being felt. Beside the crates, tucked into the wheel well, was a waterproof PVC tube sealed with wax. Shadow stood over the largest crate and barked once. A sharp, commanding sound that cut through the quiet Nebraska night. Jack reached for the PVC tube first. His hands were shaking. He cracked the seal and pulled out a roll of heavy parchment and a series of photographs. The man in the photos was Silas Thorne, but not the hunched-over recluse the town knew. In the photos, he was young, wearing a Navy uniform with the insignia of a chief engineer. He was standing on the deck of a destroyer, his arm around a man Jack recognized instantly. It was Jack's own father. The 2 men had served together in the Pacific. Jack felt a lump form in his throat. He looked at the parchment. It wasn't just a letter, it was a handwritten log. "To whoever has the eyes to see," the letter began. "They told us the war ended in 45, but some things never end. They just get moved around. I've spent 40 years guarding what they told us to dump in the deep water. If you found this, you're either a thief or a brother. If you're a brother, open the crates. The boys in the 7th Fleet are still waiting for their due." Jack sat back on the tailgate, the cold night air suddenly feeling very heavy. He looked at the first crate. It was secured with a Navy-grade pad bolt. Jack didn't need a key. He knew these locks. He used a shim and a bit of tension, the way he'd seen bosun's mates do 1,000 times. The lock clicked open. Inside, wrapped in oil-soaked canvas, were rows of precision-machined brass and steel components. Jack's eyes widened. He recognized them immediately. Mark 1-4 gyroscopic stabilizers. During the war, these were top secret, the brains of the Navy's most accurate guns. But these weren't standard issue. They were modified, enhanced with gold-plated contacts and experimental vacuum tubes. Beneath the machinery lay a layer of heavy canvas bags. Jack opened one, silver, not coins, but pre-war industrial silver ingots used for high-conductivity electronics. There were dozens of them. A fortune in raw metal, but even more in history. But it was the 3rd crate that made Jack's heart stop. He pried it open, and Shadow let out a low whimper. Inside was a folded American flag, a set of Purple Hearts, and a stack of manila envelopes. Each envelope had a name and a service number written on it in Silas Thorne's neat military script. Jack opened the top envelope. Inside was a check, dated 20 years ago, made out to a widow in Omaha, and another to a veterans hospital in Lincoln, and another for a scholarship fund for the children of fallen sailors. Silas Thorne hadn't been a hoarder. He had been a guardian. He had taken the surplus that was meant to be scrapped and sold, and he had been slowly, quietly liquidating the industrial metals to fund the lives of the families the government had forgotten. But the logbook at the bottom of the crate held a darker truth. "Vance is coming," the last entry read. "Dated only a week before Silas died. He knows I didn't scrap the 74 lot. He's looking for the silver ghost. He thinks it's just treasure. He doesn't know it's a promise. As Jack read the name Vance, a pair of headlights swept across the front of the workshop. A heavy truck pulled into the gravel drive, the engine idling with a menacing growl. Jack doused the shop light, plunging the shed into darkness. Shadow was already at the door, his body low, his teeth bared in a silent snarl. The door of the truck outside slammed shut. "Miller!" a voice called out. It was Silas Vance, the scrap king. "I know you're in there, and I know you got that Chevy. I did some digging in the old Thorn files. That truck's got a weight discrepancy on the registration. About 600 pounds heavy." Jack grabbed his heavy pipe wrench. His old Navy training kicked in. He wasn't a fighter by trade, but you didn't survive 2 decades on a carrier without learning how to hold your ground. "Go home, Vance," Jack yelled through the door. "The truck's mine. I got the title. The truck's yours." "Sure." Vance's voice was closer now. Jack could hear the crunch of gravel beneath heavy boots. "But the cargo? That cargo belongs to the estate. And since there ain't no heirs, it belongs to the man with the contract to clear the Thorn property. That's me." A heavy blow struck the door. The wood groaned. Shadow didn't wait for a second strike. The German Shepherd launched himself at the door. Just as it splintered inward, Vance screamed as 70 pounds of muscle and teeth met him in the dark. Jack followed, the pipe wrench held high. He saw Vance on the ground, struggling to keep Shadow away from his throat. 2 of Vance's hired hands were behind him, one of them reaching for a crowbar. "Call him off!" Vance shrieked. "Call him off!" Jack whistled, a sharp, piercing note. Shadow backed off instantly, but he stayed between Jack and the intruders, his chest heaving, his eyes glowing in the moonlight. "Get off my property," Jack said. His voice was cold, as hard as the steel in the truck bed. "I know what's in the truck, Vance. I know about the silver, and I know about the family Silas was taking care of. If you take one more step, I'm calling the federal marshal. I don't think they'll be happy to hear you're trying to steal Navy property." Vance scrambled to his feet, his face pale, his expensive jacket torn to shreds. He looked at Jack, then at the snarling German Shepherd, then at the rusted Chevy sitting in the shadows. "You think you're a hero, Miller," Vance spat, wiping blood from his lip. "You're just a guy with a dog and a pile of junk. You can't protect that haul forever." "I don't have to," Jack said, "because by tomorrow morning, every veterans group in the state is going to know Silas Thorn's last will and testament. I'm not keeping it, Vance. I'm finishing the job." And Silas started. Vance stared at him for a long beat, the greed in his eyes warring with the fear of the dog. Finally, he turned and climbed back into his truck. His tires kicked up a cloud of dust as he roared away into the night. Jack stood in the quiet for a long time, his hand resting on Shadow's head. The dog leaned into him, his tail wagging slowly. The next few months were a whirlwind. Jack didn't sell the silver to a jeweler. He contacted the Navy Historical Command and a group of retired JAG officers. With their help, he verified the contents of the crates. It turned out Silas Thorn had saved more than just metal. He had saved experimental radar components that were still classified and worth millions to defense contractors for their historical and engineering value. The government tried to claim it all, but Silas had been smart. He had left a series of letters of intent hidden in the PVC tube, naming Jack's father as his co-guardian. As the sole heir to his father's estate, Jack was the legal executor of the Silver Ghost. Jack didn't keep a dime of the silver for himself. He used the funds to buy the old Thorn estate. He didn't build a mansion. He turned the silos into housing and the main barn into a state-of-the-art mechanical school for veterans returning from overseas. He called it the Anchor. On the day of the grand opening, the 1974 Chevy C10 sat in the center of the driveway. It wasn't rusted anymore. Jack had restored it to its original factory glory, deep midnight blue with chrome that sparkled in the sun. but he had left the bed liner off. The metal bed was polished to a mirror finish, and in the center, Silas Thorne's navy cap sat in a glass case. Jack stood on the porch of the main house, a cup of coffee in his hand. Shadow sat beside him, his silver muzzle catching the light. A young man, barely 20, with a prosthetic leg and a look of deep uncertainty in his eyes, walked up the drive. He stopped in front of the truck, staring at the navy cap. Jack walked down to meet him. "She's a beauty, isn't she?" Jack asked. The kid nodded. "My granddad was a mechanic. He told me about these old Chevys, said they were built to last." "They are," Jack said. "As long as someone's willing to look beneath the surface." He handed the kid a wrench. "Shadow and I were just about to start on a 454 engine in the back. You know anything about carburetors?" The kid's face brightened, the first real smile Jack had seen on a recruit all week. "I'm a quick learner, sir." "Good," Jack said, patting the hood of the truck. "That's all we need." As they walked toward the shop, Shadow trotted ahead, his head held high. The old German shepherd stopped at the door, looking back at Jack with those knowing amber eyes. Jack Miller, the Navy mechanic who had once felt as discarded as a junk truck, finally felt the one thing he thought he'd lost forever. He was home. And as the sun set over the Nebraska plains, the Silver Ghost wasn't a secret anymore. It was a beacon, because sometimes the greatest treasures in the world aren't the ones made of silver and gold. They're the promises we keep to the ones who came before us, and the hands we hold out to the ones coming after. Jack looked at the horizon, a quiet peace settling over him. He had fixed the truck, he had fixed the mission, and in the process, he had fixed himself. "Good boy, Shadow," he whispered. Shadow barked once, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that echoed across the fields, carrying with it the legacy of Silas Thorne and the thousands of sailors who finally got their due. The wind blew soft across the corn, whispering through the chrome of the midnight blue Chevy, a reminder that nothing is ever truly junk, as long as someone is brave enough to see the heart beating beneath the rust. If you believe that every veteran deserves a second chance, and that dogs truly are our greatest guardians, type loyalty in the comments below. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. Your stories of hope keep us going. The mechanical shop at the Anchor was hummed with the sound of pneumatic tools and the low murmur of men rediscovering their purpose. Jack spent his days moving from bay to bay, but his eyes were always on the door. He wasn't looking for trouble anymore. He was looking for the next Silas Thorne, the next person who needed a place to hide until they were ready to be found. One evening, after the students had gone to their dorms, Jack sat on the tailgate of the blue Chevy. Shadow lay at his feet, his breathing deep and steady. Jack pulled a small, worn photograph from his pocket. It was the one he'd found in the PVC tube. He looked at his father's face, then at Silas's. "We did it, Pop," he whispered. "The cargo made it home." He looked at the empty bed of the truck. The crates were gone, their contents distributed to the hospitals and the families, but the weight of them still felt present. It was a good weight. The weight of a debt paid in full. Suddenly, Shadow's ears perked up. He stood, his tail wagging tentatively. A car pulled into the drive. Not a truck, but a small, sensible sedan. A woman stepped out. She was in her 30s, dressed in a professional suit, but her face was etched with a familiar kind of exhaustion. "Mr. Miller?" she asked, walking toward the porch. "That's me," Jack said, standing up. "My name is Sarah Thorne," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm Silas's great-niece. I live in Chicago. I only just found out about everything." Jack felt a jolt of surprise. Silas's niece. We looked for months. The estate lawyer said there were no heirs. "My mother was estranged from Silas for years," Sarah said, looking at the restored Chevy with wide eyes. "He was a difficult man, from what I was told. But I recently went through my mother's old papers after she passed. I found letters from him. Letters he sent every month. With money, he told her he was guarding a silver ghost for a man named Miller. And she looked at Jack, her eyes filling with tears. I didn't come for the money, Mr. Miller. I saw the news about what you did here. I came to say thank you for knowing him when no one else did. Jack felt a wave of warmth wash over him. He reached into the cab of the truck and pulled out the old logbook. He wasn't difficult, Sarah, Jack said gently. He was just a sailor who didn't know how to drop anchor in a world that moved too fast, but he never forgot his family. Not his blood, and not his brothers. He handed her the logbook. There are entries in here about your mother. He was proud of her. Sarah took the book, clutching it to her chest like a lifeline. I think I'd like to stay for a few days. If there's room, I want to see what he helped build. There's always room at the anchor, Jack said. As Sarah walked toward the main house, Shadow trotted beside her, his head bumping her hand in a gesture of comfort. Jack watched them go, a smile playing on his lips. The story of Silas Thorne wasn't just about a hidden treasure in a junk truck. It was about the way history weaves itself back together, even when we think the threads are broken. Jack looked up at the stars, the same stars Silas had navigated by half a century ago. The Navy mechanic and his German shepherd had found more than silver beneath that bedliner. They had found the truth that Silas Thorne had carried his whole life, that no man is an island and no legacy is ever truly lost, as long as there is someone left to tell the story. The anchor grew. Within 2 years, it wasn't just a school, it was a movement. Other veterans started similar programs in other states, inspired by the mechanic of Blackridge. Jack Miller stayed at the center of it all, but he never forgot the feel of that rusted crowbar in his hand or the sound of shadows scratching at the plastic. Every year on the anniversary of the estate sale, Jack would take the midnight blue Chevy out for a drive. He'd head out to the spot where Silas Thorne's old house once stood. The fields were quiet now, the silos gone, but the wind still whispered the same secrets. He'd sit on the tailgate with Shadow, watching the sun set over the horizon. $100, Jack would say, scratching Shadow's ears, and best $100 I ever spent, and Shadow would bark, a short, sharp sound of agreement that echoed into the night, a final salute to the silver ghost and the man who kept his word. Because in the end, we are all just old trucks sinking into the mud, waiting for someone to see the value beneath the rust. And if we're lucky, really lucky, we have a dog who knows exactly where to scratch. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and rain, the same scent that had once hung over a Navy deck in the Pacific. Jack took a deep breath, feeling the strength in his limbs and the peace in his heart. He wasn't the man he used to be. He was better. He was the man Silas Thorne knew he could be. "Let's go home, boy," Jack said. Shadow jumped into the bed of the truck, sitting right where the crates had once been. Jack climbed into the cab, the engine roaring to life with a purr that sounded like a song. They drove back toward the lights of the anchor, leaving the shadows of the past behind them, moving forward into a future that was as bright as the chrome on a restored Chevy. The legacy lived on, the promise was kept, and the Navy mechanic and his dog were finally, truly free. As the truck disappeared into the distance, a single silver ingot, forgotten in the tall grass near Silas's old gate, caught the last ray of the sun. It sparkled for a moment, a tiny beacon of light in the vast Nebraska dark, before the night claimed it. But it didn't matter. The real treasure was already home. And as the moon rose over Blackridge, the spirit of Silas Thorne seemed to smile down on the world. A world that was a little bit kinder, a little bit safer, and a whole lot better because one man and his dog refused to give up on a piece of junk. If you've stayed with us until the very end, we want to say thank you. Your support allows us to tell these stories of resilience and loyalty. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that they are never truly discarded. From all of us here, keep looking beneath the surface. You never know what's waiting to be found. Good night, and God bless.